Showcasing a unique blend of melody and power, Manilla Road released some of the most iconic albums in the 80s, helping to solidify the genre of epic metal. Yet they're often left out of the conversation entirely when discussing influential, distinctly American metal bands. They have no music videos and no Headbangers Ball interviews, but if you're looking for emotional, epic, and powerful heavy metal, this band is a great place to start. Join me as I look back at a legendary band that deserves far more attention than they get, Manilla Road. Manilla Road was formed in 1977 in Wichita, Kansas, by Mark the Shark Shelton on guitar and vocals, and Scott Scooter Park on bass. The earliest full lineup would also include Scott's brother Robert on rhythm guitar and Benny Munkers on drums, but they would both leave after a stage accident killed the band's sound and light engineer. Benny would be replaced by drummer Miles Sipe, and this lineup of Manilla Road would record a 3-track demo titled Underground.
I'm in here, like yeast to Samuel. I'm in here, it was a gas.
The Manilla Road tone is already there, but they're fairly laid back here with a groovier 70s style and touches of space rock. After the demo, Miles would be replaced with Rick Fisher, a high school friend of Mark's, and this lineup would record and independently release their debut album, Invasion, in 1980.
It was pretty much self-produced, and we pressed it ourselves. We created our own record label, Roadster Records, to put it out, and did all of our own distribution ourselves. It was tough. It was hard getting things going, but the reason we did it ourselves was we sent demos to every record label in the world at that point. Nobody could care less. They didn't want us.
Invasion retains a lot of that 70s sound from the demo, and it's not bad, but it also isn't an album I revisit very often.
The up is down and down, the front is now the back. Got it all so too loud, and I can't keep track.
This one goes for an almost mystical feel with some psychedelic rock, a little Black Sabbath, and even some Hawkwind thrown in.
The heavens received, in its unoxygenized atmosphere, a ship headed for the far reaches of the galaxy. Destination, a newly found planetoid.
Super spacey. However, there is a hint of things to come with the album closer, The Empire.
The golden death of demonic domain. Manila free, the empire rises again.
It's still kinda mellow compared to where Manilla Road would go, but it does feel like it's headed in an epic direction. Manilla Road would return to the studio and record what was meant to be their second album, Dreams of Eshkatan, but they weren't happy with the results and scrapped it to move on to something else. However, it would eventually be released 20 years later as Mark of the Beast.
I'm fighting
There's still an overall 70s vibe on the album, but the songwriting for me here is quite a bit better compared to Invasion, with outstanding tracks like Avatar.
I will search until I meet my fate in the quest of Avatar. Whoa.
I love this track. It's heavy as hell and a great early example of just how powerful and epic Manilla Road could be.
Avatar, Avatar, we're crying. Avatar, Avatar, we're dying. Avatar, Avatar, we're waiting. Avatar, we are here for your saving.
Avatar is full of elaborate soloing and fist-pumping riffs, with interesting song structuring that rises and falls and builds throughout its 9.5-minute runtime. It does feel like they're still searching for their sound a bit, but there are a handful of standout songs on here, like Teacher and Triumvirate, as well as the relatively softer track, Venusian Sea. But that album wouldn't see the light of day for a while, and Manilla Road would release their actual second album, Metal, in 1982. This one does get a little heavier, but there's still an overall straightforward hard rock sound here, despite the title. Overall, this one is just okay for me, but there are flashes of excellence, like Cage of Mirrors.
Found the castle on the hill where it's said to be the necromancer's gate to hell, the cage of sorcery, mirrored balls that show us all the pathways through the mind to the other side of hell where demon warriors roar.
We were getting a lot closer to what we really felt like was the true sound for Manilla Road, but we didn't feel like we were there yet. We were fortunate enough to get some shows with some pretty decent acts, like Crocus. We did an opening show for Crocus. We opened for Ted Nugent. So we started getting some popularity in our own area, and that was really important for us, and it gave us the drive to continue on, you know.
The additional exposure would help Manilla Road get noticed by Mike Varney of Shrapnel Records, and as Manilla Road was working on their third album, Mark would write a song specifically for Shrapnel's US Metal Volume 3 compilation. This would be the absolutely iconic track, Flaming Metal Systems.
Beware, the shrapnel flies, flaming through the night, this night, tonight. The fever of blood runs high, lightning strikes from the sky, this night, tonight.
For me, this song is the definition of face-melting heavy metal, with outstanding guitar work and Mark's passionate, unique vocals.
In this world's darkest hour, up the hammers to stand, don't fall away.
Varney Ernie was interested in signing Manilla Road, but felt their new material wasn't enough like Flaming Metal Systems, so he passed on the new album. Which is a shame, because Manilla Road's next release would be the excellent Crystal Logic. Crystal Logic delivers a far more metal style than previous albums and kicks off super strong with Necropolis and a head-banging hooky chorus.
Lost in Necropolis, lost in Necropolis, lost in Necropolis, lost in Necropolis.
And as always, the guitar work is fantastic. In fact, the entire album is fantastic. Every song on here kicks ass, with a mix of heaviness, melody, and metal lyrics that read like an Edgar Allan Poe story or a Conan the Barbarian novel. But they don't leave their 70s influences behind entirely, but instead find ways to creatively incorporate them into their heavier material.
Death would grip humanity, a new solar ice age, an earth that no science could save.
So a track like the album closer can start off with folky vibes and then go into this.
Inside this hazy world of dreams I've never known, I've seen the rock come down and turn mankind to stone.
It's 1983 and Manilla Road are already weaving in groove metal with power metal and borderline thrash, and still pulling off incredibly catchy choruses.
Before the gods of hell sentence you to die, remember well, my friend, the warlord never cries. These are the words that I've heard inside my mind. When Ragnarok comes down, we'll all run out of time.
I think we just finally started to really get an idea ourselves at that time, what we were about and what direction we were trying to go. And it was really our first effort at being a conceptual band and not just a rock and roll band.
With Mark and Scott looking to get even faster and heavier, Rick would leave the band on good terms and be replaced by drummer Randy Fox. With Randy on board, Manilla Road began work on their fourth album, and while they were recording, they'd get signed by French label Black Dragon Records, and at the end of 1984, they'd release Open the Gates. Open the Gates is even better than Crystal Logic, and starts off with one of my all-time favorite Manilla Road tracks, Metalstrom. This track epitomizes epic metal for me, and it's impossible to listen to without getting pumped up. it's followed by the short, punchy title track, which is great, but I'll usually skip it because I love the track after it so much.
Heavenly fathers, astrological minds, seeking out the wisdom of the stars at night, snatched from the heavens, the thunderbolt of light, and then the scepter with the tyrant's side.
Astronomica is just as epic as Metalstrom, but in a totally different way, with a more emotionally charged feel.
Night after night, you shine on so bright, all the ancient lights should never fade away. Astronomica, the lights that bind us all, to keep us from the ball and to the stars we guide.
This was when we were starting to try and head for a lot heavier sound, a little faster as well. And it sold extremely well. It sold better than Crystal Logic had.
Open the Gates was so epic that it couldn't be contained on one LP, so the album was actually released with an additional 12-inch single containing 2 more tracks. And I know I'm not even mentioning so many classic songs, like The Fires of Mars, Road of Kings, or The Ninth Wave. But another all-time personal favorite is the album closer, Witch's Brew.
Father of Turf, long dead warriors rise for you. We drink the brew.
There's still a touch of mysticism and the songs are still catchy in their own way, but there's no question Manilla Road succeeded in getting heavier on Open the Gates. Manilla Road would follow up the success of that album with The Deluge in 1986. This is another indispensable album with absolutely huge Manilla Road staples on it, like the 3-part 8-minute title track and the 2.5-minute banger Hammer of the Witches. The Deluge continues the focus on power and destructive yet melodic riffage, with even more punch and thrashy aggression.
It's the unknown. Demon seed, God in the dawn. Test of faith, probing the soul. Echo the blade guitar.
Randy's thunderous drums are a great fit for Scott's heavy bass, and both are critical components to Manilla Road's increasingly massive sound. And they're still obviously willing to experiment, as indicated by the synth organ solo in the middle of the album, performed by a guy named Mike Metz. While The Deluge is a top album for many, including apparently Mark himself, it happens to be between two albums that I like just a little more: Open the Gates and Mystification from 1987. The Deluge is still great, but a bit more wall-to-wall aggression in my opinion, and I feel like there's a little more melodic variety on Mystification. But they'd also get even thrashier with tracks like Up from the Crypt. The highlight to me, though, is the outstanding title track, which has to be one of the greatest Manilla Road songs ever.
Some say insanity, a lesson from the mirror, master of mystery.
But even with such great tracks on it, Mystification hardly got any attention at the time, since Black Dragon Records had lost their distribution partners due to financial problems and malpractice issues right when the album was released.
So this album didn't sell very well at all. It almost went virtually unnoticed when it came out. Nowadays, this album is considered one of the four that's in the supposed heyday golden years of Manilla Road.
With Black Dragon currently out of the picture, Manilla Road would get signed to David Chastain's Leviathan label for their 7th album, Out of the Abyss. This one goes for a more power thrash sound with an overall darker atmosphere.
It's the blood before my eyes, bringing newborn life to this tortured mind. I thrive and feed on fear. Come closer now, my dear. Your Uncle Jack is here.
If you're looking for something on the faster, more aggressive side, this is a good Manilla Road album to go with. With tracks like Slaughterhouse and Midnight Meat Train, it definitely delivers on speedy, in-your-face riffs.
The butcher's here. The body's hung and overlaid inside this midnight meat train. I killed the butcher with his own knife.
Plus, Mark is a lot screamier on this album too, giving it a kind of merciful fade-ish feel.
They're cannibals with vile teeth, and comers every night to feast. They eat the tongue within my mouth. I am the one to serve them.
It's a solid album overall, but I mostly find myself drawn to their more traditional epic stuff like Return of the Old Ones and Helicon.
The gateway of magic, I'll step down inside the mind. Power and wisdom, knowledge and aim for law. The music of the gods, yes, on Helicon.
But even on these, there's still plenty of room to shred. in 1990, Manilla Road would release their 8th album, The Courts of Chaos. I'm a huge fan of this album. I especially love the opening instrumental. It starts off with some cool, creepy keyboards, this time credited to Randy Fox. And then kicks in with some awesome, epic guitar playing. Along with an overall horror theme, this one features a bit of a different sound, with a much fuzzier tone on Mark's guitar. It gives the solos a different feel, and the subtle use of those keyboards adds another layer of haunting atmosphere.
This was an interesting album because Randy, our drummer, actually programmed all the drums into a drum computer, and then we sampled his drums. He programmed the music into it, you know, all the drum beats, and then that's what we played to, basically. And that's the last time I ever even wanted to mess with triggers or sampled drums or anything.
I can understand wanting more of a live feel, and I would generally agree. But I love the way this album sounds. From the first full track, the thrashy Dig Me No Grave,
I may not be at the top, but still it's good to be alive. Feeling the flow of the chops, whether it be music or flesh. This is where sanity stops, but don't take a break from me yet.
to the mighty closing track, The Prophecy. Black Dragon Records were back to release the album in Europe, but they were still blacklisted in North America, so Leviathan released The Courts of Chaos in the US under the name Mark Shelton.
It really wasn't supposed to be that way. It was just the only way we could get it out in the States and get distribution on it. So,
with tensions mounting due to the distribution issues, the metal scene in general, and personal disagreements between Scott and Randy, Manilla Road would disband after The Courts of Chaos, and Mark would begin work with a new band called Circus Maximus, including Aaron Brown on drums and Andrew Koss on bass. They'd record an album together, but Black Dragon would insist that they release it under the Manilla Road name to increase sales. So instead, the album was called The Circus Maximus, with a sound totally different from Manilla Road.
I have raised my voice in the night unto the elder gods, were weapons from my dagger, and I am lost.
This one just has a generic 90s sound to me, with a more commercial approach. And there are some cool guitar parts from Mark, but there's just not that much on here that really stands out to me overall. After a couple years playing with Circus Maximus, Mark would get back with Randy Fox to play some live shows as Manilla Road. They'd be joined first by bassist Harvey Patrick and then Mark Anderson. But these lineups never recorded any material. In 2000, Manilla Road got invited to perform at the Bang Your Head Festival in Germany, which Randy initially said he'd do.
And then a few days later, Randy decided he didn't want to do it. And I said, well, I've already booked it. I'm not going to turn it down. I think this is an opportunity that we can't afford to pass up. I'm going to do it no matter what. If you're not going to come along, I'm going to have to get another drummer. And he got really upset at me for that. That's all since been settled. We're really good friends, and he plays with us. It's all good. But anyway, after that, I ended up doing the Bang Your Head with another drummer, Mark Anderson. When we got back, we got another drummer to do the album with, which is Scott Peters.
They'd also be joined by the band's longtime road manager, Brian Patrick, as a second vocalist to record Atlantis Rising in 2001. Released on Iron Glory Records, Atlantis Rising is pretty solid overall, with a return to a more epic Manilla Road sound. There are some proggier touches here as well, with a bigger focus on atmosphere and a concept combining ancient civilizations, Norse gods, and Cthulhu.
I've made the sacrifice. The spell has been cast thrice. What we have longed for all these years.
I do like this album for the most part, but I'd also say it's a little light on melody for me, with more of a doomy thrash feel and some proggy atmospheric bits mixed in. But there's still some great stuff on here, including the title track. I like their following album, Spiral Castle from 2002, quite a bit better. Spiral Castle drops a lot of the proggy atmospheric stuff and is a bit catchier without losing any heaviness. Brian Patrick's vocals are a lot more prominent on this album as well.
This is when Brian Patrick started singing with us too. And he didn't sing a whole lot on Atlantis Rising, but he started singing a lot more on this one, Spiral Castle.
Overall, this is a really solid Manilla Road album, with 7 great tracks of epic metal and catchy riffs. Mark was going through a divorce around this time, and apparently Scott Peters and Mark Anderson couldn't handle all the drama. So they'd leave, and Harvey Patrick would return on bass, along with 20-year-old Corey Christner joining on drums. This lineup would record the 13th Manilla Road album, Gates of Fire. Gates of Fire isn't perfect, but it has an interesting concept and some standout tracks.
This day we shall solve the riddle. You shall feel my steel.
The album is essentially a trilogy of trilogies with 3 stories broken down into 3 tracks each. My favorite of these has to be the first, The Frost Giant's Daughter, based on a Conan the Barbarian story.
I've read that story like a dozen times, in my life.
Right.
But every time I read that story, it just really talks to me. And the first lines are something like, them saying, let me know your name so that I can announce you to your brothers in Valhalla when I send you there,
Deadly virgin, son of God. Hear the thunder of your muzzle when giants fall.
The second story is a retelling of the Aeneid, and the third is about the stand of King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. After Gates of Fire, the group signed with Italian label My Graveyard Productions, and Brian would take time off to deal with some personal issues, while the rest of the band recorded Manilla Road's 14th album, Voyager. Voyager is freaking excellent, and easily the best Manilla Road album for me since The Courts of Chaos. With an overarching Viking theme, the songwriting here is consistently awesome, with kick-ass riffs and epic standout solos. There's a nice variety of styles on here too, with all of Manilla Road's sounds represented. You get plenty of epic stuff, like the badass title track, which is pure classic Manilla Road, and just gets more triumphant as it goes.
As the hot heroes sail to the ends of the earth. As the Valkyries watch for the Voyager.
And there's also plenty of great doomy thrash. Brian wouldn't be gone for too long, and he'd be back on board by the following year, while his brother would leave once again, this time to be replaced by bassist Vince Goldman. This lineup would record the 15th Manilla Road album on Shadow Kingdom Records in 2011, Playground of the Damned. I'm honestly not that crazy about this album. I know some people are bigger fans of it than me, but it's a bit more stripped down, and the songwriting here just feels a bit underwhelming for me, especially after Voyager. Like, even though I think the chorus of Brethren of the Hammer is super fun and catchy, I still have to admit it's fairly generic. There was also a bit of turmoil while making this album though, as Vince Goldman was able to record just 2 tracks before revealing to the band that he'd unfortunately been diagnosed with Meniere's disease, which affects your equilibrium and makes it impossible to be around loud noises like heavy metal music. He'd appear just on the last 2 tracks, including one of the album's better songs in my opinion, Art of War.
The rising of the crimson tides. We've turned the art of war to genocide.
Mark himself would finish out the bass duties on the album and refer to his bass and keyboard playing alias as E.C. Hellwell. Mark would actually release an album under the Hellwell name in 2012, which featured himself, Johnny Thumper Benson on drums, and Ernest Cunningham Hellwell on bass and synthesizers. It's not an official Manilla Road album, but Beyond the Boundaries of Sin is badass, with way more compelling songwriting to me than Playground of the Damned. The overall sound isn't all that different from Manilla Road, and the synth definitely adds another layer of epicness and works really well with Mark's crushing guitar. In fact, part of me wishes Manilla Road had incorporated more keyboards like this. But aside from the keyboards, this album is pretty much just powerful, old-school Manilla Road. Between Playground of the Damned and the Hellwell album, Corey Christner would leave Manilla Road and be replaced by drummer, heavy metal journalist, and longtime Manilla Road fan Andreas Noidi Neuderth. They'd also be joined by bassist Josh Castillo, who toured with the band after the release of Playground of the Damned. This lineup would record Manilla Road's 16th album, Mysterium, in 2013. I'd have to place this one right around Playground of the Damned. For me, it feels like mostly straightforward metal along the same lines, and doesn't do much for me overall.
The ground shall bear the mark of glory's crimson stain.
but it also has a couple of decent ballads, including an acoustic track.
Search till the end of all time if I must. I'll never give up my beliefs. Carry the torch till my life turns to dust. Never let go of my dreams. No, I'll never let go of my dreams.
And a synthesizer composition that you'll either find kinda cool or totally misplaced. However, Mysterium did come out just 6 months after the Hellwell album, so kind of a quick turnaround. It would be another 2 years before we'd get another Manilla Road album, and the difference definitely shows. The Blessed Curse is amazing, and I'd even go as far as to say possibly the best 21st century Manilla Road album. Now on Golden Core Records, this is Manilla Road's one and only double album. The second disc is called After the Muse, and there is some good stuff on it, but also 25 minutes and 2 tracks are just 2 versions of the same song. Disc 1, on the other hand, is pretty much outstanding beginning to end. Everyone sounds fantastic here, with imaginative, heavy tracks packed with powerful riffs.
The battles rage across Mesopotamia, giving birth to the land of kings. A war between Sumer and the Akkadians before the civilized world dream.
And while the solos, again, are pretty much always outstanding, Mark's solos on The Blessed Curse are full of unique ideas and little details that make this album stand out even more.
I finally felt like I had made a production that was worth the band and the music. This was an album that was meant to show everybody that we still could do just about anything we wanted, and that we were still very artistic and not just a cut and dry rock and roll or heavy metal band.
It does feel like the band put everything they had into this album, with emotional tracks like the excellent ballad, The Muse's Kiss.
Never break the circle of magic lore that stings the horn from the abyss. I have felt the muse's kiss.
I just can't say enough good stuff about this album. Highly recommended. group would also put out an album of acoustic tracks in 2015 called Obsidian Dreams, and then another Hellwell album in 2017, this time with just himself and Randy Fox back on drums. This one is pretty similar to the first Hellwell album and pretty good overall, although I'd say the organ synth parts are a little cooler on the first album. But regardless, the music still rocks, and Randy's drums are showcased really well. With bassist Phil Ross replacing Josh Castillo, the final Manilla Road album would come out 5 months later, To Kill a King. I wish I could say I was as blown away by this one as The Blessed Curse, but overall, To Kill a King is just okay for me.
The king's assassins came, but did not survive. I'll have my uncle's head, vengeance shall be mine.
I still like it, and it is easy to listen to, but there also aren't really any major classic tracks for me here either.
Just one desire, to win or die, a gladiator's way to freedom. Fight or die.
But that said, even an average Manilla Road album still has some pretty great stuff on it. The day after this performance, Mark Shelton would sadly pass away due to a heart attack brought on by severe heat exhaustion. This ended the 40-year career of not only a band, but a phenomenal guitarist, excellent songwriter, and a true metal pioneer. All of the involved band members contributed to the heavy sound and incredible albums, but Mark Shelton was obviously the driving force behind Manilla Road and his quest to bring heavy metal to the world. To me, Manilla Road is the greatest, generally unknown American heavy metal band. Even with these epic albums, they just don't get talked about enough. Although they really should, and I know many metalheads out there would agree. But if you're diving into Manilla Road for the first time, here are the essentials. Mark of the Beast from 1981, Crystal Logic from 1983, Open the Gates from 1984, The Deluge from 1986, and Mystification from 1987. Those are generally agreed upon to be absolutely mandatory albums. I'd also include Out of the Abyss from 1988 and The Courts of Chaos from 1990. For the albums from the Reformation period, I think Spiral Castle from 2002, Voyager from 2008, and The Blessed Curse from 2015 are absolutely freaking amazing. For extra credit, I'd say Atlantis Rising and Gates of Fire and To Kill a King are all worth a listen. And of course, those Hellwell albums should be on your radar too. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Manilla Road, a criminally overlooked, epic American metal band that still stands out today. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. All right.